The notice came in a brown envelope addressed to the church hall in Prairie, and she read it standing at the kitchen table with her coat still on because the fire had not been lit that morning, and there was no reason to light it for one person. Seeks capable woman, Prairie Homestead, Saskatchewan, sheep and garden, widower with boy age 7, board and wages discussed, right to general delivery, Heron Flat. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and put the kettle on. She had been in Portage 11 months since the collapse of the thing she had thought was her life. Not sudden, the way people imagine collapses, but slow and thorough, the way a spring thaw takes a road apart, piece by piece, until one morning you look and there is simply no road. Her husband had not died. He had left, which was, in some ways, harder to arrange furniture around. The house had been his, the account at the co-op had been his. She had carried out of it a cedar chest, a winter coat, her mother's cast iron pan, and the particular steadiness of a woman who had learned not to be surprised by the shape of her own losses. She had been working mornings at the church hall and afternoons taking in alterations for Mrs. Threlkeld at the dry goods, who paid in credit and occasional cash, and a kind of approving silence that was not unkind. It was not a life, it was the outline of one. She went back to the notice that evening. She read it again. She wrote back 3 days later. She said she was 31, could manage a kitchen and a garden, had worked with animals when she was young, and expected she could again. She did not mention her husband. She said she was available from the 1st of November. The reply took 10 days. 2 sentences. November works. Train arrives Heron Flat on Tuesday. I will send word with Greaves at the grain elevator. The handwriting was even and gave nothing away. She folded the letter into the pocket of her coat and told Mrs. Threlkeld she would be leaving at the end of the month. Heron Flat was 4 hours north on a train that stopped at every grain elevator between Portage and the edge of anywhere. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the first week of November, when the sky was the particular white that precedes real snow and the wind off the open fields had decided to mean it. The platform was a strip of weathered board and a tin awning. Beyond it, a settlement rather than a town, grain elevator, post office, a hardware store, a small hotel with a hand-painted sign so faded. The name was mostly implied. She stood with her cedar chest on the platform and waited. The train left. The platform was empty. There was a man outside the hardware store loading fence wire into a truck. She carried one end of the chest and dragged the other and made it to the hardware door and asked the man inside if he knew where she might find the homestead at Heron Flat, belonging to the man who had posted the notice. The man, gray-haired, methodical, the kind of man who answered questions by first establishing that he had understood them, told her the homestead was 8 miles north on the track road. He told her the man who owned it had been in 2 weeks ago for wire and a bolt of canvas, and had said very little except that he was patching the lambing shed before the cold came down. He told her there was one truck available for hire in Heron Flat, belonging to a woman named Arvid Steen's wife, who had kept it running since Arvid had passed. She thanked him and asked if he could direct her to Mrs. Steen. Steen turned out to be a tall woman in her 60s with a face like weathered limestone and the truck to match. She looked at the cedar chest. She looked at her. She said she could drive her out and back for $3. She said it without apology and without inflection, and she said she'd heard there was someone coming out to the Halvorsen place. She said that was right. Mrs. Steen said nothing further about it. She lifted one end of the chest. She took the other. The track road north was 2 frozen ruts across open country, the fields running flat to the horizon on both sides, the sky pressing down on all of it with the particular weight of late autumn in Saskatchewan, a sky that was not beautiful and was not cruel but was simply enormous and indifferent and yours to deal with. She kept her eyes on the road ahead and used the time. She used it the way she had learned to use it, not planning what she would say, but reading what she was driving into. The color of the soil where it showed through the frosted grass, the direction the scrub willows bent along the creek line, the way the land held its flatness as if it had decided, some long time ago, that there was no point in pretending to be anything other than what it was. The homestead came up on the left, without warning, low against the tree line, a farmhouse with a chimney going and 2 outbuildings behind it. She saw the lambing shed first, the new canvas on the roof bright and out of place against the weathered wood. He had done that in the last 2 weeks. She noted it. Mrs. Steen pulled into the yard and shut off the engine and sat for a moment without speaking. Dog came from behind the barn at a lope, not aggressive, just interested. From the near outbuilding came the sound of sheep, low and continuous, the sound of animals settled for the evening. No one came out of the house. She climbed down and stood in the yard. Mrs. Steen unloaded the chest without being asked, set it on the frozen ground, and got back into the truck. She said she came through on Fridays if anything needed running to town. She gave this information as a plain fact and not as an offer and drove out. The dog sat down beside the chest and looked at her. The door of the house opened and a boy appeared on the step. 7 years old, perhaps, with his father's jacket on and his arms inside it, the empty sleeves hanging. He looked at her from under a too large wool hat. He did not speak. She said she was looking for his father. The boy pointed at the barn. She carried one end of the chest to the porch. The boy came down without being asked and took the other. They carried it up the steps and through the door and set it inside. The kitchen was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something that had been in a pot for a long time. The boy looked at her. She looked at the pot on the stove, which had about an hour left in it before it went wrong. She took off her coat. He came in from the barn while she was standing at the stove with her coat over the back of a chair, adjusting the damper. He stopped in the doorway. Mid-40s, not tall, the kind of build that came from decades of actual use. His face had been open once and had since closed most of the way. Not from meanness, but from the long particular arithmetic of a man who had been managing alone and had learned to account for himself accurately. He looked at the pot. He looked at her hand on the damper. He looked at his son, who had found a position near the door that was both inside the room and technically outside the situation. He said she had made it. She said the train ran on Tuesdays. He said he had meant to be there. Something with the older you. She said she understood. She said the pot needed another hour and asked if the boy had eaten. He looked at the boy. The boy said he had not. She found bread on the shelf and cut 2 slices without asking and set them on the table and told the boy to sit. He sat. The man stood in the doorway a moment longer. He was not deciding whether to trust her. He was deciding, she thought, what category this moment belonged to. She did not help him place it. She turned back to the stove. He came in and washed at the basin by the door, methodical about it, and sat at the far end of the table. She put bread in front of him too without comment, and he ate it without comment, and the boy looked between them once, and then fixed his attention on his bread, and that was the first meal. He showed her the small room off the kitchen, where there was a cot and a hook on the wall, and a window that looked out over the near field. He said it was what he had. She said it was enough. He said the sheep were her concern mornings and that he would show her the order of things tomorrow when there was light. She asked about the boy and school. He said there was a schoolhouse 4 miles east that ran Mondays through Thursdays, and the boy had been going when the weather allowed and not going when it didn't. He said it as a plain fact and not as a failure, and she accepted it as such. He went out after supper to check the animals. She did the dishes. The boy dried them without being asked, which told her something about him and something about the household. She lay awake that night in the small room, listening to the wind find the gaps in the window frame, a thin, persistent sound, and thought about the pot she had adjusted, and the bread she had cut, and the boy who had dried the dishes without being asked. These were the first 3 things. She thought about what else there would be. She fell asleep before she had finished counting. In the morning, she was up before either of them. She had the fire going and water on by the time light came over the east field, pale and flat, the frost on the grass holding the color a moment before the sun decided what to do with it. He came in from the barn at first light and stopped when he found the kitchen warm. He stood in the doorway the way he had the night before, and she thought this was probably a habit of his, stopping in doorways, taking stock before committing to a room. He told her the order of things: sheep out to the near pasture by 8, checked again at midday, in before dark. Hay from the northwest stack. Water from the trough on the south side, which did not freeze if you kept the cover on, which he apparently did not always keep on, which she noted. The boy's lunch needed packing on school days. He himself ate at midday if he came in, and at supper without fail. She listened without writing it down. He went back out. She packed the boy's lunch, found his boots by the door, found a problem with the left one where the sole had begun to separate at the toe, wrapped it temporarily with a length of cord from the kitchen drawer. The boy watched her do this with a focused attention that reminded her of someone learning a card trick. She said the boot needed proper repair and he should keep his foot flat when he walked so the cord didn't slip. He said he knew how to walk. She said she didn't doubt it. He looked at the boot and then at her and went out the door. She went to the sheep. There were 23 of them, 16 ewes and the rest young stock, and 2 rams in the side pen. The lambing shed was dry, which was the canvas's doing, and the bedding was overdue for turning but not yet critical. 2 of the ewes had rough coats, and one stood apart from the others with her head slightly lowered, which was not right. She checked the water, which was half frozen on one end where the cover had not been replaced. She broke the ice with the heel of her boot and checked the feed remaining in the rack and found it short by about a third. She went to the haystack, forked what was needed, came back. He came around the corner of the shed while she was closing the gate and she told him about the ewe. She said the animal was either low on something or in the early stage of something else and she wasn't yet sure which. She said she would watch her through the morning. She said the water cover needed to stay on at the north end. He looked at the ewe. He said she had been off for a few days. He said it plainly, without apology, the way a man reports a fact he has been monitoring but did not know how to act on. She said she would make a supplement for the feed. Kelp meal if he had it, dried molasses, a little loose mineral. She said it was the standard thing for sheep going into a hard winter when the pasture had gone thin. He said he had some of that in the feed room, he thought, from the last time. She said she would take a look. He nodded and went back to what he had been doing. She spent an hour in the feed room. He had the supplies in approximate order, which was not the same as order, but showed that someone had thought about it once, and then let the thinking lapse. She put things properly where they belonged, and made the supplement and mixed it into the ewe's feed and checked the others. At midday he came in, and she had soup from the previous night, stock and bread she had started that morning. He sat. She sat. The boy was at school. Without the boy, the kitchen was quieter than she had expected. He said the north fence needed 3 more posts before the ground froze hard. He said it the way he said most things, as a fact that existed in the world rather than something that required discussion. She said she had seen the corner section coming in. She said the wire on the east run had also gone slack in 2 places. He looked up then. He had not thought she would have seen the fence coming in. She had seen the fence coming in. He said he would get to the east run when the north posts were in. She said that made sense. They ate. Outside, the sky had gone the color of pewter, and the wind had picked up, and she could hear it in the willows along the creek. He finished his soup and pushed back from the table and paused with his hands flat on the wood. He said she could go to Heron Flat on Fridays if she needed anything. Mrs. Steen ran through. He said he kept an account at the hardware and at the post office co-op. He said the account at the co-op was current, but not by much. She said she would make a list of what was needed in the kitchen before Friday. He said he would add to it. He went out. She washed the dishes and dried them and stood at the window for a moment looking at the field. The frost had not lifted all day. The ewes were moving slowly in the near pasture, the sound of them low and carrying in the cold. The one she was watching was eating now, which was a good sign, probably. She went back to work. Friday she rode with Mrs. Steen into Heron Flat with 2 lists in her pocket, his and hers combined into one. At the co-op, the woman behind the counter was named Nola. 60s, small, the kind of woman who filed everything mentally and forgot nothing. And she looked at the list and looked at her and said she had heard there was someone out at the Halverson place helping through the winter. She said she was on through winter, cooking and keeping the house, minding the sheep. Nola said the account had room and for most of it. She said the last order had been in August and there was a balance but it wasn't gone yet. She said it without cruelty and without particular concern, as a simple account of the terrain. She looked at the list. She crossed off 3 items: the extra lamp wick, the tin of sardines that had been more want than need, the bolt of flannel she had thought she might use for the boy's boot lining. She pushed the list back across the counter. Nola looked at what remained. She said she could do that much. She began pulling things from the shelves. She said she would need to know the balance before the new year to judge what else could be ordered. Nola said she could write it out. She wrote it out on a slip of paper and tucked it into the box with the order. On the drive back, Mrs. Steen said nothing for the first 3 miles, which was comfortable. Then she said the boy had been thin last winter. She said it as a statement, not a complaint and not a concern, simply a fact she was depositing somewhere it might be useful. She did not expand on it. Neither did she. She thought about the boy's boot. She thought about the soup she had started that morning, which would be ready when they got back. She thought about the slip of paper in the box with the balance written on it, and the 3 items she had crossed off the list, and what she would need to figure out before February if she was going to keep the kitchen properly through the worst of it. She watched the track road unroll ahead of them through the gray afternoon and thought about the field, the ewes moving in it, the angle of the winter light across the frozen soil. She had seen worse land than that come back. She had not, until now, had a reason to see it as her particular problem. She did now. She was not certain what to do with that. She noted it and put it somewhere she would find it later, and watched the homestead come up through the bare willows at the bend in the track. He fixed the north fence that week, 3 days of it, coming in at dusk with the cold all the way in him, eating without speaking much, leaving again before she had cleared the table. She and the boy ate without him on the second evening, and the boy talked more than he had before. About the school, about a boy named Coffee who had a dog that could open latches, about whether fish could feel cold the same way people did. She said she thought fish were probably accustomed to it. He considered this seriously. He was a serious boy, which she thought was either nature or circumstance, or probably both. She had started, by the end of that week, to see the household the way she had begun to see the fence coming in, as a system that had once had logic and had partially lost its logic and could be returned to logic if approached in the right order. The kitchen stores had a system. The sheep rotation had a system, or the beginning of one. The boys' school schedule had the outline of a system that no one had lately enforced. She worked with what was there, the way she had learned to work with what was there. He came in the 3rd evening from the fence with one hand wrapped in a rag. She looked at it. He said it was nothing, just the wire. She unwrapped it at the basin, cleaned it, wrapped it properly with the bandaging she kept in the kitchen tin. He did not tell her to stop. He did not thank her. He held his hand still while she worked and looked at a point somewhere above the door. And when she finished, he said he would get to the east run wire tomorrow, if the ground held. She said she had found a second loose section past the willow corner when she had checked the ewes that afternoon. He looked at her. She had gone to the east fence to check it herself. It was his fence. She had gone to check it. He said he would get to both. She tied off the bandage and handed him back his hand and turned to start supper. The boy had been watching all of this from his position at the table with his schoolwork, with the particular careful attention of a child who has learned to read weather. The ewe recovered. The supplement had helped, or time had, or both. By the 3rd week of November, the whole flock was on it, and the coats of the 2 rough ones were already better at the neck, which was usually where you saw it first. She told him at supper one evening, not as a report, but because it was relevant. He listened. He said the last 2 winters had been hard on the flock, and he had lost more than he should have in the spring. He said it the way he said things plainly. She thought about what it cost a man to say a thing like that plainly, and said nothing in response to it, which she thought was the right answer. She spent an afternoon going through the lambing records he kept in a notebook on the feed-room shelf. The records were detailed, which surprised her. Dates, weights, complications, which ewes had needed help and which had not, what the losses had been and when. The handwriting was the same as the letter, even no waste. She read through the last 2 years and stood in the feed-room for a while thinking about what she had read. Then she found a pencil and added 2 notes in the margin, small, clear. What the supplement amounts had been and when she had started them. What the ewes' numbers had been before and after. She put the notebook back. He found it that evening. She heard him come in from the barn, and then the pause that told her he had gone to the feed-room, and then a longer pause, and then he came into the kitchen. He did not say anything about the notes. He hung his coat and washed at the basin and sat down at the table, and she put supper out, and they ate. The boy said Coffee's dog had opened the latch on the coal room at school and gotten in and eaten something and been sick, and everyone had thought it was funny except the teacher. She said she thought the teacher had a point. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the first one she had heard. The boy looked at his father the way you look at a door you thought was locked that turns out not to be. December brought 2 weeks of hard cold and then a storm that closed the track road for 4 days. She had known it was coming by the smell of the air 2 evenings before, the particular cold that carries ice from a long way off. She had said, without elaborating, that they should bring in an extra 3 days of hay before it hit. He had looked at the sky and agreed, and they had done it. The following morning, the two of them working together at the haystack in the gray early light, while the boy was still in bed, not talking much, handing and stacking. And she had noted at some point that they had found an efficient rhythm between them without discussing it, without even quite deciding to. The storm kept them in. The boy did his schoolwork at the kitchen table, and she worked through the mending that had been accumulating since she arrived. The boy's other boot, 2 of his shirts, a pair of the man's work pants where the knee had gone through, his heavy coat where the lining at the collar had split along the seam. She turned the collar and re-stitched it, and it would hold another 2 winters if he didn't work it too hard. He watched her work on the coat without speaking. He was mending harness at the other end of the table, the 2 of them on opposite sides of the lamp. The boy asleep by then, the storm running along the eaves in long pulls. At some point he said the last woman who had fixed that coat had been his wife. She did not look up from the seam. She said she had thought it had been fixed before. He said about 3 years ago. She said that was good work, whoever had done it. She said the original seam had been very even. He said she had been a precise woman. A quiet followed that was not uncomfortable. She finished the seam and turned the collar once to check the fall of it and set the coat on the pile. He said the storm would run itself out by Thursday. She said she thought he was right. He was right. By Thursday, the sky had lightened, and the track road was passable by midday, and he went out on the tractor to open up the driveway, and she shoveled the path to the lambing shed herself. The flock was fine. The ewe was better than fine. She was the loudest one at the fence when she came in with the hay, which she took as a good sign, as animals know their fortunes better than people often credit. She stood in the lambing shed after and looked at the flock and thought about what the records had said about last spring. She thought about the feed ratios and the supplement schedule and the timing on the older ewes. She had some ideas. She had not said them yet. She said them at supper that evening. She said she thought the lambing losses the previous springs had been partly to do with timing on the supplement. That if they started earlier in January rather than February, the ewes going into lambing would be in better condition. She said the record suggested it, and she said she was not certain, but she thought it was worth trying. He listened to all of it. He asked 2 questions. She answered them. He sat with it for a moment, and then he said he thought she was probably right and that they would do it her way this season. She said it might not make a difference. He said it might. She got up and put the kettle on, and he stayed at the table. In January, Mrs. Steen stopped her on the road. She had been into Heron Flat for thread and a bag of oats, and said she had heard from Nola at the co-op that the Halverson place was looking well. She said more than one person had remarked on it. She said the flock looked better coming through the gate than it had in 2 seasons, and she had heard the boy was getting to school more regular than before. She said that was kind of Nola to mention. Mrs. Steen looked at her for a moment from under the brim of her hat and said it wasn't just Nola. Then she drove on. She walked the rest of the way back in the cold, the thread and the oats under her arm, thinking about what it meant that people had noticed and what she thought about that. She thought she did not mind it. February was when things shifted, though she would not have been able to say on which exact evening. It was not a single thing. It was the accumulated weight of many small things, the same way ice forms, not in a moment, but through a long, patient accumulation that eventually holds. He had begun to leave the lambing records on the kitchen table in the evenings instead of in the feed room. He had begun, when he came in at midday, to say what he had been doing rather than simply sitting and eating. which was different, and she had noticed when it changed. She had begun, without deciding to save him the best of whatever she had made, the end of the loaf that was softest, the cut of the roast that had the most of the good part. She had noticed herself doing it and had not stopped. The boy had begun to say goodnight to her, as well as to his father before he went to bed. She said goodnight back. This had happened so naturally, she could not have said when it started either. On a night in the second week of February, after the boy was in bed and the storm had passed and the cold was the dry, settled kind that comes after, he stayed at the table longer than usual. She was at the stove. She had been warming some milk for herself and had left it too long and was trying to decide if it was salvageable. He turned his cup in his hands the way she had come to know meant something was working through him. He said she had come in November because she needed work. He said he knew that. He said he had posted the notice because he needed help getting through winter. He said he knew that too. He was quiet a moment. The fire moved. She set the cup down on the stove. He said he had not expected the thing she had brought with her. He said he did not have a proper word for it. He said whatever it was, it had changed the way the place felt to come back to, and he had been trying to decide for some weeks whether to say so, and he had decided to say so. She stood with her back to him for a moment, not avoiding, just giving the words room to settle. Then she turned. He was still sitting at the table, his hands around the cup, looking at her with the particular expression of a man who has said a careful and true thing and is waiting without expectation to see what becomes of it. She walked to the table and sat down across from him. She said she had not come here expecting anything past wages and winter. She said that had changed. He nodded once, carefully, as though the information were something that needed handling. She said the boy needed a boot that fit properly. She said that you with the rough coat would need watching through lambing. She was carrying twins, she thought. She said the east fence wire was going to need the whole run replaced come spring, not just the 2 slack sections. He looked at her. She said she was not planning to leave in spring. He was quiet. The fire settled. Outside, the cold held the yard perfectly still, the kind of stillness that only comes when the temperature has dropped below the point where wind can be bothered. He said he was glad to hear that. He did not elaborate. She did not need him to. Between them, the lamp held its small light, and the cup had gone cold, and outside the stars were very bright, the way they get when the air has no moisture left in it, and there is nothing between you and the distance. She got up and put a split of birch into the stove and closed the door and came back to the table. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she had not known was still warm. He set one in front of her and took the other. She wrapped her hands around the cup. They did not speak for a long time after that. They did not need to. The house made its quiet sounds around them. The nail in the far wall, the window glass contracting in the cold, the small, reliable voice of a building that is being kept. In the morning, he drove the boy to school himself and came back and found her in the lambing shed, checking the ewe with the twins. He stood in the doorway for a moment and watched. The ewe was calm, pressing her forehead into her palm while she worked along the belly, reading the position of things. He said she was good with them. She said they were good to read once you knew what to look for. He came inside the shed then, not crowding, just present, and picked up the second ewe's water basin and took it out to refill it. He did not ask if it needed doing. She heard him at the trough, the water running, the sound of it in the cold morning air, and she kept her hands on the ewe and felt the 2 lives in there, close and unworried, and thought this was something she had not expected to think about a place, that she already knew its sounds, that she had already begun to know what silence here meant and what it didn't, that the distance which had seemed so large when she had driven into it in November had become simply the distance, familiar, hers to account for, neither small nor large, but just the particular measure of this specific place. He came back in with the basin and set it down. She said that ewe would go in the next 10 days. She said she would want an extra lamp in the shed for nights and some of the iodine from the cabinet. He said he would get it. She said she thought both lambs would be fine. He looked at the ewe. He said he hoped she was right. She said so did she, but she thought she was. Outside, the winter held the land in its late-season grip, patient and loosening. The light a little different than it had been in November, a little longer in the afternoon, the first suggestion. Not warmth, not yet. Just the suggestion that the cold was not permanent, that it had never been permanent, that it would lift the way it always did, and that under it the field would be there, the same field, changed and ready.